But just so I can go over what the layout is of the property, we call this the east pivot, that's the west pivot, and in the middle we've got 2 drip blocks. The drip blocks are broken up into very small zones, so in the midst of this we've got 16 controllable zones in the drip, and for the last 4 years we've just gone back and forth with corn and cotton. The idea of it being a demonstration is we've done it on a large scale. Every bit of this has been done with full-scale ag equipment from planting to harvest, and we've taken the best strategies that we can to overlay things we're curious about on top of that. So as you drive by, it's always going to look like a full-fledged farm. We're not taking anything to destruction or anything to a zero yield. It's trying to be the strategy of what can we do within a legitimate production setting to fine-tune ways to be better, primarily at water conservation, but always with the mindset that this has to be sustainable economically. And so water per dollar, dollar per water, unit water per unit yield, those are the metrics that we're looking at. We're not trying to say that we can do this without any water. We're also not trying to say we're going to ring the bell on yield in any situation. But what's happened to me has been a real story to tell. I think the big story is where we've come in the 4 years. We've basically shown that on this postage stamp of owned property, we're able to irrigate an average over the last moving out of the camera, aren't you? Y'all are wise. There's not, I noticed Paige kind of snuck in beside. It's like, this is real sneaky now. Okay. Over the last 4 years, if we were to take the actual reportable numbers on this full postage stamp, the number of water that we'd be reporting would be less than 14 acre inches per acre. Okay, the wetted acres is in the range of 15.5 inches per acre, and that's done by that corn and cotton rotation. The way that it's worked is our average corn irrigation has been 21.5 inches on the pivots, and the average cotton irrigation has been less than 10 inches per pivot. And so when we put those together in the proper perspective of what does a true 2-year rotation look like, that's the benefit of this system. When you add the drip in, it goes even further. We've been able to pull out a lot of water on the drip because we can dance around rainfall events really well. Where I would hardly recommend you shut down a pivot unless you're getting multiple days worth of ET by a rainfall event. You know, a rainfall event needs to be about an inch for me to say, hey, shut that pivot down. It would be even better if it was 1.25 inches. You might get some benefit of your pivots on the road. With drip, if we had any rainfall event that was approaching 0.2 of an inch, we could shut it off for a day. And there's been periods in that where we've shut it off for 6 days in a row because we were able to keep monitoring that and think, oh, it's time to irrigate again. We get another 0.4 of an inch, like that's another 2 days. And so that's where that margin has changed. And as we've gotten really intense in managing the corn on the drip, we've satisfied that curiosity of can drip match pivots with yield. And with intense management, we've shown that it can exceed pivots with yield. The trade-off is you are going to be managing that like a son of a gun. You're going to be on top of it. It can be done, but it's not really fun for anybody. What we've noticed with the cotton, and I'll point out our cotton this year, this pivot has had the second most irrigation volume we've had in the last 5 years, just shy of 14 inches. It's at 13.6 is where it finished up. That's a lot more water than I'd ever want to put on cotton. That's kind of the benefit of this system, is we've got the capacity because of some management we've done, and this year called for more water than we wanted to put on. We still got the pivot running in the corn. This will be the last irrigation. I don't like that, but what do you do? And so this is how this interplay has to work, is it's truly a production system. And when we look at this rotation, we can go back and justify, well, there's some reasons why we've adopted pre-water in certain years. When you have 2 consecutive winters where you get 0 precipitation and you're really aggressive with finishing the crops in the field, you're going to have to go back and make some management decisions. That would be a real world scenario. And that's exactly how we've managed this property. The other side of that story, when I told you the average of irrigation over these 4 years, is that the yields have been pretty nice. The yields on the cotton, with an average of less than 10 inches applied, is 2.9 bales to the acre. The average on our corn across all of that has been 244 bushels per acre. So when I look at that and say we are at less than 3.5 GPM per acre and pushing yields that are that high that I would say would be top end yields for historically what we thought would be full water use with 3.5 GPM per acre. I think that's a real story to tell. And that's the confines we're trying to work in, is how are we going to make this system through these small nuances be something that's sustainable. The other story I would share related to that over the years is we've gotten better. Some of those irrigation application numbers that may seem a little bit high is because at the start we didn't have all the confidence in the world that we were doing the right things. And we don't have confidence, you overcompensate in certain ways, and this we overcompensate with, it's like I'm going to put another irrigation pass on. Like right now we're running water on that pivot, and that's been a debate back and forth. I'm confident we could pull the water off that pivot. Stan, who's got to harvest that crop, is losing sleep at night. It's like, I get that, Stan. I understand this debate, and this has been an anomaly of a year that way. Let's talk about that decision. And what we talked about, that's one of the beauties of this rotation, that, and I know this is a little general speaking about it, but one of the reasons why in a conservation system I'm comfortable putting that last irrigation on is I know the risks of it being the bad call, the potential yield drag by not having that last irrigation. I also know that next year I'm going to have a cotton crop in there. And that cotton crop, if it starts with a full profile that I've left behind, tending to a corn crop the best that I can, I'm going to get that water back. We've not seen through any of this that we've leached any water in the off season or during the season with deep probes. And so I can say with some confidence, I'm going to put a crop in there that's got a root system that if it has to is going to go down past 6 feet and pull all of that water. So the way that I've been able to look at this system as it's developed is the corn crop gives you an opportunity in the long run to provide that proper pre-water to your cotton if you don't take it all the way to the end. This, on the other hand, started with a full profile. We shut the water off there on the 6th of September at that 13.5 inches, and it has been a race to the bottom. It's going to be bone dry by the time we get into harvest. It's dry now. This has been a wonderful September for us in terms of temperature and heat. It's sustained. I don't know when our frost is going to be. This is the first day I've put a jacket on. Y'all that are adjusted, you don't need a jacket, but I'm like to freeze to death right now, I can guarantee you. I hope it stays warm for a little bit longer. If it's 10 more days of what we've had for the last 20 days, I think we're going to be really, really happy with this cotton crop. But I wanted to give that as our overview and our effort. Some things that we're looking at off center that I think are useful is doing a deep dive into what silage production looks like. If we had more acreage here, I would love to do that. That's been on my mind for about 2.5 years. We're going to get into it. We're going to see how that fits into the water consumption profile, how that fits into a farming operation with just all of the intricacies for the things we've been paying attention to lately. How does that fit to a tillage program? How does that fit with leaving stubble and residue? How does that fit with a rotation like this where we're talking about cotton? Is a silage cotton rotation going to provide us some benefit maybe? And one of the challenges we've had with this intense minimum till corn cotton is it's hard to harvest our cotton some years. There's a lot of stubble left. You're not going to see much in this because it seemed to burn off with the winter that we had, but that's been one of those challenges back and forth. Another item we're going to start looking at is some of these novel approaches to increasing organic matter in soil. It's been our evidence, and I think it's the anecdotal knowledge of the area that if you've got better soil, you can cope with short water much better. So could we do some of these small things that are not really a cover crop and boost organic matter in the soil? You know, the debate we've had is for a long period of time, Jourdan's had a cover crop on that pivot, and the question was, is a cover crop really where we want to be looking here to make these benefits that we need to have in terms of soil organic matter, because it's costing us nutrients, it's costing us water, it's costing us a lot of other things that we would love to have in stock for the crop that we get to harvest. You know, one of the things related to a cover crop that I've been a little concerned about, and you'll see that as we walk through it today, with the dry winter, we made an effort in the drip and in this pivot to plant some rye in areas, and the rye, it kicked our butt when we didn't have any precipitation this winter. it was really tough coming around at the end of the year because we didn't have any moisture in the top of the soil, so germination got a little bit tough. And as germination for our primary crop got tough, we had a weed problem that went through the roof. All of the periphery here was lousy with kochia. It just overwhelmed us. And when we look at it, it's like, what was different between other strategies that we've used? And one was that we had rye that went green, went back yellow because it ran out of water up top. And then we had kochia that just took off that we never could hardly turn the corner on. So there's a lot of these nuances that we're putting on full display. I hope you feel free to ask any questions as we go, as we're looking at the effort here. I want to introduce what we've got going on in this field that's more specific than most. We've got Jourdan, who's got her race trial here. Historically, that's been in the drip. We felt like that's been a little bit of a stepchild being in the drip. We've had trouble with germination, so last year, 2 years ago, we straightened the rows in this pivot so it would be a little bit more accommodating for things that we wanted to look at and demonstrate and study. Once we had it settled in after the corn crop and went back to cotton, we decided with Jourdan, let's put the trial in the pivot so we can reflect more acres in the area, but also so we can work on our stand a little bit better. Some things we've seen this year with that stand, and we'll get a walk out into it, as Jourdan describes it, is we have had trouble with cotton stands. This year is probably our best stand overall, not by numbers, but by uniformity. The end count is about 40,000 plants per acre. The seed drop was just over 70,000. So the attrition, the percent stand is poor. But what I am happy to see is we don't have these big 12-foot gaps like what we've been having for the last couple of years, especially in our drip. I recognize I'm rambling. I've got lots to talk about. You can pull the string and I can rattle for a long time on these things. I get passionate about these projects, and I think we're making a difference here and showing what we can do. But I would like to take that step to introduce Jourdan to her specific projects here, and then hopefully we can get right out in there and field as many questions as you'd like to ask and cover as much ground as we could.
Yeah, definitely.
Jourdan,
yeah, thanks so much. So it's been a great opportunity to work here at the Water Conservation Center. As Nick said, this year we do have our race or replicated agronomic cotton evaluation, or just variety trial, out here, but then also we've done some cover crop work on the west pivot. And I will say that the objective with the cover crop work was due to producer interest in cover crops and specifically concerns about water. And first and foremost, the cover crop trial was probably very pared down to what we would all like to see, and just due to the scale, and because there's also the desire to have field scale research plots, not small plots. We were comparing a wheat cover with a mixed species as well as just the corn residue. And there's a lot of value in that residue. And so what we did see is that we did not have a yield drag with the cover crop when we got it established. And first and foremost, that's what's key. Because we are in a corn cotton rotation, we are coming in behind the corn crop and behind the cotton crop with that cover crop. So we're looking at seeding that in late November, maybe even early December one year. And the goal also was, we are not going to use irrigation to establish that. We're going to rely on Mother Nature. So by the time we would get that cover crop established, in most cases it was like February. And so we had a very narrow window, February, March, April, to actually get the cover crop going before we terminated to go into the next crop. Now this year we didn't get any cover crop established. I mean, there on that west pivot there wasn't anything established. One year, our first year, we did see a 200-pound lint increase with the wheat cover. No difference between the mixed species and the wheat, and that was due to that windstorm that came in 2019. So having the benefit of that protection was really key for that young cotton crop. And we saw that early in just the developmental stages of the cotton when we compared the physiological stages between no cover and wheat cover. We were staying throughout the season usually 2 to 3 nodes ahead with that wheat cover. So that was really significant. At this point, because we have been comparing, corn residue and going behind 200 plus bushel corn crop, we haven't seen a change in soil physical properties as well as soil carbon, but it's been 3 years. Again, not a consistent cover crop stand, but we're maintaining that residue. Now, in hindsight, if we were to come in and had more area, it'd be nice to come in and not have the residue, have maybe conventional or a more intensive tillage, not just strip till, and start comparing all those different segments. So that becomes something that you really need more scale, and that goes back to where small plots can be handy, because it's so hard to go in and put 5 or 6 different treatments on a pivot, replicate it, and do that. As you all know, we interestingly enough, started a cover crop project outside of Hartley this year, and it was in a silage system, and specifically because of the concern about the compaction in silage. And when you have back-to-back winter silage and then a summer corn silage crop, there is so much compaction. And even though many of these locations are not using water in excess of what would be, I guess, an allotment or what should be used, because of the compaction, the efficiency of that irrigation is really down. And you see, and I know y'all seen it, that water run off those fields because it's just not infiltrating. And so we did have a cover crop treatment where we did roller crimp, and then also came in and looked at comparing that to the harvested wheat silage. So roller crimped wheat, and then had wheat silage. And these were big plots, 40 feet by 2,000 feet, almost, going the full diameter of the pivot. And what we did see was great benefit in that roller crimped wheat. Not only did it suppress that weed pressure in this year, because you have that mat and that sunlight's not hitting the soil, and then the moisture, the infiltration, it was amazing to see that in comparison to where we chopped the wheat silage and then came right back with corn silage. Now the irony is, the producer has said, great, but I'm done. Big research plots are interesting, but this is just a pain. So, it's kind of one of the challenges. I get it. Small plots are not necessarily representative of field scale, but field scale plots, and Stan and Nick can agree to this, are just a big pain as well. But
they're really hard. They serve a purpose. They're really hard.
Yeah, they are hard. So I think there's still a lot of value and so much we can learn from having a cover and how we're managing that. How are we defining a cover? We have this conception of a cover crop from what's in the farm press journals, what's in the Midwest, but there's so much that we can do to maintain our systems and build up our soils, and so much we can still learn from that. So that's just a side note about the cover crop work. So much of the work that I have done here, though, has been in cotton, and I think that because of what cotton brings to the system with regards to water conservation and really extending our water supply is so very important. And that's exactly what Nick addressed with that. We have our variety trial out here. I also want to briefly discuss, though, some of the work that I was able to do a couple of years ago, looking at what would be considered the last effective bloom date or last effective flowering date of cotton in the high plains. And so much of our information on cotton production does come from the South Plains or from other cotton producing regions. And so, as you all know, and so many of you have the same questions, do these recommendations really hold up for our region? And of course, I know y'all have been growing cotton for a long time, and y'all are definitely proven to be experts, because it's amazing what this region can do per acre in comparison to other regions. But still, when we look at managing cotton, driving across the region, there's a lot of pivots that are often running in September, and with the hope that we can mature some of those later flowers, and those bolls will contribute to a harvestable yield. And so the question really does become, is that an effective use of that water supply? Now, of course, as Nick did say, in a rotation, that water usually will be in that profile and can be used the next year. by the next crop, but nevertheless, it still is a valid question. How late should we be irrigating, especially if we do have a decent soil moisture profile? So what we did on one of the variety trials, I came out every other day from first flower through after cutout, and I have some handouts on this over here. It's quite a, yeah, sure, that would be great. It's quite a bit of information, but really considering what is happening with regards to that cotton crop and how impactful is or are those later flowers. Yes. Yeah, so this was actually from 2020, and it's probably because of COVID that I was able to come out here and literally sit in the cotton field for 5 to 6 hours a day and literally tying ribbons onto cotton flowers and dating them. And so that's what I did from first flower, and that year first flower was on July the 27th, which was pretty comparable to what our average first flower is. If we have early fields and dry land fields, we might be flowering closer to mid-July, but usually it's mid to late July when we start to see first flower, especially in an irrigated field. Now this year was the exception because of the heat, but first flower on July the 27th. And so looking at two varieties, what would be an early variety as well as a medium early, Delta Pine 1820 and Next Gen 2982. So the first figure that I have actually shows the average white flowers per plant. And I tagged 20 different plants of each variety. And so you can see from that first flowering date to what would be cut out, we're looking at anywhere from 1 to close to 3.5 flowers per day. And so, but we continue to see those flowers up until mid-August. And so with that, that's when I stopped. But of course, going into September, we still see flowers. And these are those later flowers that everybody wants to save. I'm still blooming, and even though we're blooming at the top, we still want to save those flowers. So the concern is, are those actually going to be harvestable bulbs? And so most of this data of this type is actually managed for picker type cotton. And so everything's by node. And so I decided that rather than combining the harvestable bolls by fruiting position, I would actually look at harvestable bolls by flowering date, because with stripper cotton, we're taking everything. It's not just by that fruiting position. So if you turn it over to figure 6, you can actually see of those white flowers, how many of those white flowers became a harvestable boll. And so that's looking at, say for example, Delta Pine 1820. The blue bar would be the white flowers, and then this gray that's a fraction of that would be how many of those flowers actually became a harvestable boll. And you can see that actually once you get to cutout, a very small fraction of those flowers become a harvestable boll. Now, one thing I do want to point out that's really interesting is on July the 29th, you'll see that even though that was really early, and we're looking at early flowers that usually are those bowls that are your money bowls, for Delta Pine 1820, there were not any of those flowers that became a harvestable boll. And there was a rainstorm that day. And so one of the things that we often don't consider is what is the impact of rain or early morning irrigation on pollen. And when water hits those anthers early in the morning, those will become sterile. So, fortunately, cotton is a plant that it compensates over many weeks for one bad day, one bad event. So as your pivot's passing, and if you have say 10 feet that's getting an early morning irrigation, you would not necessarily notice that, the bolls or the flowers that were hit that morning don't become a boll. But definitely a full field that had an early morning rainfall event and those anthers were hit by that rain, if they were no longer viable and that pollen was no longer viable, then you would have lost the bolls for that day. So it was really interesting that actually did follow what was in the literature for other research on July the 29th for 1820. Now 2982 still did have a few of the white flowers that became harvestable bolls, but not 1820. Another one was on August the 19th. So looking at that though, if you turn it over on page 5 to the bottom, table 1, that actually gives you an indication of the seed cotton produced before cutout and after cutout, and how much of that lint is actually from flowers after cutout. So if we look at the total seed cotton that was produced for those varieties, we're looking at 4,183 pounds from 1820 and 4,642 pounds from 2982. Now, from the flowers that were from first flower to cutout, we have close to 90% of that lint is actually from those flowers before cutout. We have only 281 pounds after cutout for 1820 and 354 for 2982. And so looking at the gin lint, same thing. We're looking at, over 90% of the lint is before cutout. So again, when you think about the value of your irrigation and the value of maintaining irrigation later in the season, if you have good water in that profile, it's not necessarily meaningful to keep on irrigating that pivot into September. Now, a hot, dry year where that profile's dry, that's a different story, because we know that we need water for fiber development, and we know that we need water so that those bolls aren't shed. But still, with moderate water, you don't necessarily need to keep on putting on a lot of irrigation. And so this data, I think, really supports that. When you look at 90% of your yield actually comes from lint that's produced before cutout, that's definitely pretty significant.
Jourdan, I'd make the comment that this is data that we've been craving for years. This is pretty important. It's items we speculated on. I'm glad you've come up with this.
Yeah, no, and it was great to be able to do that here and have the opportunity. I think it really...
Was this mostly from here, or is this from...
This is all from here.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was all from the cotton that was on the drip out here. So what's really interesting though is to look at not just the lint, but fiber quality. And so the very last page, all these very small figures actually do have the decline in fiber quality, and specifically Mike, going from the first white flower till we get to cutout, and then later bolls as well. And so when we talk about a mini boll, and knowing that those early first position bolls are really where the quality and the pounds are, we can definitely see that with Mike, because your pounds are tied to your Mike and the thickness of that fiber. So those first white flowers, are where you have that Mike that's going to be in that premium grade, and then it's just downhill after that. So when we talk about, again, saving those late season bolls, well, it's a very small fraction of your lint, but also when you think about your uniformity and the value of your grade, how is that possibly decreasing your grade as well by getting those bolls, that are very small and not necessarily contributing that. So the micronair, but also when you look at the strength, the elongation, length, everything with that, all definitely tied up to it. So I ran this on HVI, but I also took it to the Texas Tech Fiber Quality Lab, and they ran it on the APHIS system as well. And so that's just going to give you more indication about the upper quartile length as well as the lower quartile, not just an average. And those more refined measurements are shown on the back, as well as the NEP. Now the NEP does not have as strong of a linear relationship as the other qualities. But when we talk about NEP, we're talking about, of course, those knots. And poor quality fiber is more apt to make a knot. And of course, we know when we buy a t-shirt at Walmart, and you see all those little knots in there. Well, that's because that's poor quality cotton that goes into those cheaper shirts. Whereas a nicer shirt doesn't make those neps, or nicer quality cotton doesn't make those neps and winds up in a finer quality shirt. So, you can see that with age, we do see an increase in neps we see, that quality, really pairs well with all of that. And of course, NEP's program on that very last figure is very strong, and especially for 2982. So 2982 as a whole just didn't have the fiber quality, the mic as Delta Pine 1820. So I think we all know that's why 1820 has remained a strong variety in this region, just because it does have the quality. So that's just a quick overview of that, and I just think that this is interesting data that I definitely wanted to have the opportunity to share and discuss with y'all. Of course, the variety trials out here, I don't know if y'all, did you want to walk?
I would love to walk out there, but I want you to take a breather. Maybe we visit about this for just a little bit, because I've got a handful of questions about the implication of this, and maybe y'all do as well. One of the things that come to mind is we've always been debating, when's that last irrigation date? When's that last time we continue to push? We've tended to think that was the last week of August. It lines up somewhere in there with some moderate profile. I think it's identified the fact that we're right to be concerned with shutting the plant down orders of magnitude more than getting those last irrigations on. I mean, the data is there for that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that comes to mind is we've had a considerable amount of debate about, do you come back and do you replant? Do you supplement your plant where you've got your old crop and come in and put new plants beside it when you've had a poor stand? This type of data shows to me that some of those strategies are misconceptions. Like, a lot of folks are saying, if I've had a poor stand or some potentially catastrophic damage, and I want to go in and replant to get my population up, that concept is I'm getting my yield, I'm getting my quality from the first crop, even though it's sparse, and I'm getting my yield from this late plant crop that's filling in the blanks.
Right.
This is an argument to me that that's not the way that really happens.
Right.
And I would say that that's what we've seen here by being forced to work through what would be some marginal stands.
Yeah.
It seems like if you can just bear through it, it's going to look ugly. Just bear through that. Don't put the additional resource in, and work with the best you've got. We've seen that the yield kind of comes back to you, and this is saying that the quality of that begins to make up some of that gap too.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And that's what we've seen on some of our other research sites as well. I do have an irrigation by planting date, by seeding rate project, small plot project at Bushland. And what I did see last year, it was really interesting. Early planted May 1, late planted May the 23rd. And early planted, we were hailed out. And if I was on any producer's field, I would not have questioned the producer making the decision, this is done, I'm replanting. But because we had our late planted, we saved it and then came back in and planted late. Well, it was amazing to see how that plant recovered. And those early plants, it was about 3 nodes when that hailstorm hit. And it was just shredded. The terminals, I mean, I didn't think, they were just little sticks. I thought, there's no way these plants are going to recover. And like Nick said, I mean, it came back. Stands were poor, but as a whole, when you look at our stand count data for all of our trials, you know, we're usually 50 to 60% of what we plant. It recovered, and our early planted out yielded our late planted. This year, our early planted cotton came up really strong because we did have those warm conditions, good soil temps, and I was really excited about it. Then all of a sudden, late May hits, we had windstorms, we had a little cold front come in. That cotton turned yellow, chlorotic, looked like we had maybe some seedling diseases. I thought, okay, this is gonna be bad. But again, we saved it. Again, I think our early planted is gonna out yield our late planted. And so I do think that there's a lot of misconceptions in there. And I don't necessarily wanna say they're driven by industry and by seed dealers, but I do think that there is that incentive to, you know, get out there and replant, and it's amazing what cotton can do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best attributes that it has. Is it works through its own calamity, and it seems to find the finish line one way or the other.
Yeah.
Jourdan, I'd love to take everybody out that way to show what you're doing if you're at that point in the program.
No, we definitely can. I mean, we only have 8 different varieties here this year, and it is because it's Extend Flex only. As I have considered varieties and then just what's happening within the seed industry, next year I've really rethought that we might focus on just only mixed technology locations, because at some point we're going to have only a Delta Pine only trial, and I don't know, unless y'all can encourage your seedsmen to enter our trials, I don't know how meaningful, say, Delta Pine only trials are going to be for producers. BASF was anticipating releasing their HPPD tolerant cotton next year, but I have heard that might be extended another year. Of course, everything's still up in the air with regards to XtendFlex. So it's just interesting to see what's kind of happening in the cotton world, and don't know what's happening with varieties. But we only have 8 different varieties at that location. There is a handout with a plot map, have some weather information. You can see that when, as Nick talked about the irrigation, we reached over 107 degrees here in mid-June, and y'all were all addressing that, and that's when everything was burning up. So that was why this received about an extra 2 inches of irrigation than it normally would have. On this, I also do have information with regards to our other locations, if y'all are interested, where we have other trials, as well as all the varieties that we are evaluating across all the locations. And we do give every farmer cooperator an opportunity to put in what they would be their farmer entry. And I think it gives producers an opportunity to look at what you're interested in next to these other varieties under your management conditions. So we do have farmer entries in that list as well. But of interest, probably most interest on this back page, are the stand counts. And so we do all of our stand counts about 4 weeks post planting. What I've learned is that, and as you all have all seen, cotton comes up 2-3 weeks after planting, and it doesn't seem like we really wind up with our final stand till at least 3 weeks after it is planted. So just so that we are truly counting what is in that field, whether it's contributing to harvestable yield or even competition, I go in and do that 4 weeks after planting across all locations. So this location, seeding rate was 74,500 plants per acre, as Nick said, and our trial average was right at 45,000 plants per acre. But you can see a big difference between varieties. Delta Pine 1908 actually did have the highest stand, looking at 71% of that seed drop actually making a stand. The table to the right actually does show the fraction of what is dropped that becomes that final stand. And across all locations, this was probably one of our best years with regards to stands, looking at our final stands being closer to 50%. But you can see that especially where we have our dry land or deficit irrigated locations, we have a pretty low stand. We still do have a dry land trial in Moore County with Justin Garrett just to the east of Dumas. And as to be expected, because of just the very dry conditions, the stand is sparse, but still we wound up with FiberMax 1621 actually having 63% of what was dropped making a stand on that dryland trial. We did get a very timely rainfall about a week after planting, which really I think is what saved the day. But it's going to be interesting to see how that yields just with all the stress there. So because of this year, we don't have many dryland locations, but we can definitely, if y'all want to look at the trial walk out there. I think at this time of year, though, one of the most meaningful things to talk about, though, is harvest aid management, and really looking at the maturity and not making a harvest aid decision based off of one variety. If you have multiple varieties, definitely consider the difference. For example, out here, 1908 versus 2107, big differences in maturity when we look at just those nodes above the uppermost cracked bowl and what we are seeing with regards to timing. I mean, there are some varieties that could probably take a harvest aid maybe in the next week or two, and there's a couple of them that ideally we might not put a harvest aid on until later. But fortunately, we do have these warmer conditions, so that's going to help speed that up as well, hopefully. Just like a nutrient or
a 924-3.
Okay.
And then there was another product that it's just a micronutrient package with your zinc, manganese, iron, copper, boron. So I don't know. I didn't do any testing. I just did the whole field, and I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, well, and so, I mean, that's a good point when we talk about vole retention. Of course, boron's important for vole retention, zinc's important for vole retention. Of course, a little is good. That's why you definitely, spray on a little bit and not a lot, because a lot of boron will make you shed those voles faster than anything. But that's the best way to do it, like you're doing it, just a light dose with a plane. Potassium, as a whole, if we look at all of our fertility or soil analyses, we never have a potassium requirement because our soils are kaolinitic soils or kaolinitic clays and naturally very high in potassium. But when you look at those clays, a kaolinitic clay, it's like a book. And so you have all these clay layers that are stacked high, and the potassium's in between those clay layers. And late in the season, when cotton really needs potassium, is during that boll fill period. And potassium is really important for the lengthening and the turgid, or the strength of the cotton fiber. And so if there is a potassium deficiency late in the season, it can really impact fiber development and also water use efficiency. When we consider the availability of our potassium, that can be very important. And I do believe that's one of the reasons why it's actually important to consider what fraction of your cation exchange complex is potassium. And we often, again, are just looking at that total and not considering the availability of the potassium. And so if you are seeing issues later in the season and what you might think to be a potassium deficiency, definitely reach out to me and we can look at a complete soil analysis and consider what fraction of that cation exchange complex is available, or the potassium available on that. And that's really important. And of course, not just for cotton, but all of our crops. And it's amazing to visit with producers who are putting on a little potassium and actually do see a response. And it's always a surprise. That's not to say everyone will. It definitely depends on the situation. One area, though, where I am actually starting to see some potassium deficiencies is in continuous silage production. And that is because we are taking everything from that field. And so when you're not leaving that residue to go back into that system and constantly harvesting everything, you can over time start to deplete that system of potassium. So it is important that when you're doing your soil analysis, every now and then do a complete analysis. It will really give you a bigger picture of the availability of some of these nutrients. And I know it does cost more when you go from a basic to a complete. But really, a couple $100 in a soil test can save you thousands of dollars in either unnecessary fertilizer applications, or help you address some deficiencies and make you more in yield. So just something to think about, those late season potassium needs as well. So sorry.
Oh, that's all I had.
Okay.
Everything else is just kind of normal.
Okay.
Get 34-0, pre-plant.
Yeah.
Let me give you a prompt, Stan. What's our tillage practices and what's your PGR practices on the cotton? We haven't covered those yet.
Yeah, well, this was corn last year, and so I've never used any kind of fertilizer other than 924-3. We strip till through the corn stalks, leave the corn stalks standing, and then that's the only tillage we do. And then on the PGR, we did 2.5 ounces of stance early, and then we came back later with another 3.5 ounces of stance, because it was kind of lengthening out pretty good. So we shut it down pretty hard, I think, with the 3.5 ounces.
And so again, when we start thinking about irrigation and PGR management, and depending on how aggressive you want to be with the PGR program, these shorter varieties, these medium varieties, provide us a little more flexibility, not to have to be as aggressive with the PGR program as a medium tall that's that tends to get a little more growthy. And of course, this variety is also a little more indeterminate, so you can just tell kind of by the variability. It's wanting to keep going, or wanted to keep going, whereas this variety was more determinate and ready to shut down.
If you go back to our first couple of years here, you were looking at trying to categorize which varieties are going to fit here better. Some of the race entries were coming from the whole suite, including items a little bit south. You've since pared that back to try to narrow it down to what's going to fit the North Plains essentially the best. What are some of those traits that you saw and then began selecting for within varieties, like early and late, the smooth versus hairy versus?
Yeah, no, I think that's...
So I think those are really an important piece of what you've been finding here.
Yes, yeah, that's a great point. And I didn't bring that data, but that was really good data. We had 1 year on the drip over here. And what we did was cut the irrigation off early versus, started the irrigation early on one half, and we duplicated the trial, versus on the other half, we actually didn't start irrigation until after corn would be in tassel. So really kind of simulating a limited irrigation system, corn cotton rotation. You don't want to stress your corn, but you want to then move water over to cotton later. And of course, early in the season, our cotton crop, we're looking at about 5/10 or 5/100 to a tenth of an inch per day during some of those early stages. So cotton can handle that stress early on, and we all know corn can't. So anyway, what we did see though, with regards to maturity classes, that really became a big consideration for those limited irrigated systems. Lots of our early and very early cotton varieties are pushed for deficit irrigated and dryland systems, but what this research showed is that those varieties will just shut down and they will never recover. They're very determinate under water stress. They're not going to come back, whereas more of a early medium variety has the ability to come back in and compensate. Now, if you are going to have the irrigation on early in the season, an early variety has the potential to put on that bowl load, and it can hold those bowls, and then you could shut it down and it will finish off very early in the season. So it really is important to consider that maturity class and how you are placing those varieties under different irrigation systems. Yeah, because early varieties, they're fast, they're good, and they allow you to get out of the field, but they can also shut down too quickly and not give you the yield potential you want.
One of the things I would say, just even going season to season, that we've observed, it's been a while since I've been in this field, and looking at the boll load as it's uniform, looking at the plants as they're uniform, this is a much different looking crop than last season's crop, and probably even the year before, but especially last season. To that point that Jourdan was making, we've got the bowls all the way to the bottom, where last year we shed our bottom bowls, and probably most did as well. One of the things that I've looked at is what are the things that we're doing to make sure that this plant is set up to be as healthy as possible compared to a cotton and cotton on cotton monoculture, or compared to cotton being a non-primary crop. One of the benefits of the corn cotton rotation that we're trying to tease out is, can you truly in your rotation have two primary crops that are sharing the stage going back and forth? And what I found is that by following corn, by setting this up where it's a positive opportunity as possible, we end up having a very reliable cotton crop year in, year out. And I don't think you get that opportunity if it's not following corn. So that's an observation that I would make given this year that's been very encouraging after a year like last year, where you think, are we doing this all wrong? Is this all the way the worst thing we could be doing? Our yields were okay last year, but something physiologically happened in the cotton that I still haven't categorized yet. Why did it shed all of those first and certainly first position bowls? But anyway, I guess the long and short where I was going with that is, in the midst of this also, we're gathering solar radiation information. We're gathering temperature information, obviously the rainfall information. We've got 4 operating weather stations that are pulling different information out of here. We've began to cooperate with Dr. Craig Bednar's on this work, another overlay. He's doing a lot of the backgrounding data information that Jourdan and I have been just kind of out of our grasp. He's working on this year because it's just a huge volume of how do you take solar radiation, growing degree days, try to develop what a plant model or heat units plant model would look like in cotton in the North Plains. Those are things that are coming right out of the center currently as well. And you know, the goal of it is really to try to categorize what are we seeing, how can we become masters of this crop, which has been an unruly master to us for so many years. You know, are we missing some pieces that allow us to be better dictators of how this crop works? This looks like we're finding some answers. This crop looks like how I would like to see cotton.
Yep. Yeah, so it'll be...
We've spoken this way a whole bunch, and I know you all are quiet, but there's not one of you that has a mind that's ever at rest. So what kind of thoughts, questions have you got? I'd love dialogue more than anything. Russell, that's your prompt.
I'm all ears.
The fact of the matter is we don't have all the answers. And so being all ears is one thing, but I think Jourdan and I probably share this. We're ears too. We love to hear what you guys are finding. That's shaped every bit of what we're doing out here.
I fully agree. Yeah, we need that input to drive the research where it needs to go.
I think it's one of the disconnects that historically has happened with research, and one of the things that's been the synthesis of why the district and the board has gotten behind this center is if you take this ship down these novel paths based on a pet project or based on somebody's specific research interest, you don't answer the questions we need. But that dialogue, the back and forth that we've had over the years, I hope you see that that's what we're doing here, is we're taking that, trying to find out the answers to those questions, because that interaction is what makes this area such a special place to be farming. You know, over the last couple of years, I spent tons of time in different farming settings, different crops that are more interesting to me than cotton, to be very honest with you. But I want to come right back here because this is where the learning is happening. This is where the growth is happening. This is where the experts are farming. And so that feedback is just really crucial. Maybe you guys don't get to hear that on occasion, but that interplay is why we're going to be farming well after a lot of the world can't anymore.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
What year was this?
So that was 2020.
This was 2020?
Uh-huh.
Okay, and there's a September 9 cold front in there. And so last year and this year we didn't have that. We've had a lot of heat in September. So what would this chart look like last year and this year as opposed to this?
So I do have that data online in the online published variety trial, and where you see this kind of dip right here, you actually do see it, you know, kind of continue more vertically. And last year I think we ended up like right at 2200, just or slightly over this, about 100 more growing degree days, but it still wasn't significantly more. Even at this, with this warm weather, you know, we're still collecting about 10 growing degree days per day, maybe some days a little less. So, you know, we're kind of slowing that down. We're starting to plateau off anyway. But what I was initially really concerned about with regards to this September 9th cold front was that it was just going to stop fiber development and it would impact all those earlier bowls. And what we did see, especially on this field, it didn't. And there were a few fields in the region that I did see, especially dryland fields that year, that did defoliate in response to that cold front. The temperature, gosh, it dropped down to, 30.
Yeah, it was below 40.
Yeah, for a couple hours that morning. and 37 I think it was, or something like that. It wasn't freezing, but still. So those, there were very limited irrigated or dryland fields that did defoliate in response to that. But irrigated fields that had a good canopy, that canopy, just like with all crops, it provides a microclimate and suppresses the impact of that temperature. And so we didn't see an impact on bolls and fiber, and there was concerns, of course, harvest aids. You'll probably remember that. I mean, gosh, it was amazing the planes that were flying before that weather event. But people who I knew who didn't get their harvest aids put on and applied them after that, the plant was still able to metabolize that, and they didn't run into an issue not getting bolls opened or harvest aids put on. Now, that said, though, I do think with cold enough weather, I have seen bolls, fuse because of cold weather. So not saying that cold weather can't cause issues, but fortunately that year, that did not create as much of an issue.
So one of the observations we made during that event, and I was really concerned about how fiber was going to develop, how the plant was going to develop, when we watched probe data for about a 7 to 10 day window in there, those plums stopped, like zero change in water. Then it slowly came back, and then through the rest of the month it started using water again. I think the biggest hiccup for that year was not so much that cold happened, it's that when it happened, it just stalled everything for a week to 10 days. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of came back.
Yeah. And I did see corn that year that had reduced test weights, and and it definitely did impact some fields where we had some corn plots, and because of that. But I was amazed that cotton was not as impacted as we thought, and I do think it goes back to what we talked about earlier with regards to early stands. Late season resilience. Cotton is more resilient late season than I think we give it credit for being. I mean, it is a perennial tree that we are trying to manage as an annual and suppress chemically and with genetics, bred to be shorter. And so, this plant wants to keep growing. And of course, that's why it sheds fruit and does things so that it'll keep growing. But that cold weather didn't kill it or shut it down.
Some observations we've seen, this is that back end, I think Jourdan probably got your answer, is that frost, although it seemed huge, wasn't near the impact that we thought it would be, mostly because it happened after what was the crucial dates. We're finding that somewhat on the front end as well, that the huge rush to plant cotton so early doesn't really help you because you're accumulating heat units so slowly. That we saw, our nominal planting date here for cotton has been, give or take, the 5th of May. This year it was a week after that. We've had plantings as late as the mid-20s of May, and we still make it to the end. I think that sweet spot is if you can get either early enough to have something established before the dip in early May in temperature, which we've noticed happens every single year. There's a 10-day window about the second week of May where it just plummets on you. If you're either early enough before that or can wait after that, it seems like you still are fine with heat units. Your biggest priority at planting is making sure you've got a good stand, not accumulating heat units. Mm-hmm. It rises so fast the last week of May and through June that one day there can take care of almost the entire first 3 weeks of your planting if you plant early enough. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is what we've seen is, in my mind, I start as a skeptic and then I try to dispel those myths. And I've built up in my mind, we're just so crunched for heat units, we have to work for every last drop of a heat unit. And what we're seeing is that's not really the case.
Right, I agree.
We've got a little more buffer up front and a little bit more buffer at the end. You have to be cognizant of it, but you can create some other ancillary compromises if you try to chase those last heat units. The heart of what you're doing is in the heart of the season with the cotton crop.
Mm-hmm. And in cotton, we are very hung up on heat units, but we produce more per heat unit. We have more effective heat units here than South Plains or off the Caprock because of the heat. And
you got more sunlight.
Exactly.
And that's the measure that's important.
So the two we're looking at right now is we're trying to rewrite the heat unit metric based on heat units for here. One, We're gathering the solar radiation because I think that's the key. I would love to rewrite cotton crop management based on solar radiation. The heat units are kind of an antiquated deal because it's 2 points and an average.
Yeah.
One of the benefits we have here is we've got a long exposure to the sun. We've also got a very nice window in what I would call premium heat units. Okay, this is something that you notice when you're looking at fruiting crops that's different than, say, a grain crop, which kind of goes like this. Your period, that time window exposure is just crucial. And what we find here is we have lots of days that tip up to 92 degrees and go back down. Tip up to 92 degrees and go back down. Where the more traditional cotton areas, it's blowing past 92 degrees to 100 something, and then it's coming back down. All of that's outside of the window.
Yeah, and anything above, what I've noticed when heat units are calculated, a lot of people are taking temperatures above 100 and including that in the calculation. And that's not effective. So you need to cap that. You don't exactly.
Those are stress units.
Exactly. And so, and even, a 78 degree morning, that's still stressful. These plants, the fact that we can drop down to upper 60s, low 70s, just like in our corn, that's why we can do so much here.
Yeah.
They can recover.
I think this is what's exciting to me is we've kind of had this sense and feeling in the ether, but we've been putting together enough bit of information that in short order we're going to have that data. We're going to have that number to say, here's what solar radiation looks like compared to plant stages. That's why Jourdan's been tagging historically, is we've got dates, times, heat units, solar radiation accumulations with a documented, this is what the cotton plant is at this stage. We're going to get there. Those are things that take time. It's one of those things where I look at it and think, oh, I know this is where we're going to go. I want the answer now because I thought of it. It's like, no, and unfortunately it takes a little time to put that together. But I will assure you that we're right in the midst of that. That's exactly what we're in the pattern of doing here. Mm-hmm. The beauty of it, and I know that sometimes the district doesn't love it because this is a demonstration, is the fact of the matter, this is legitimate research going on too, in a way that's going to matter. You can look at this, you see it's all large scale, but tucked inside of this is many of the measurements and calculations and record keeping that's going to be necessary to background all of that anecdotal with facts to say you can count on this. This is what's happening.
I had a nephew that took a cotton plant straight west of here to Las Vegas, New Mexico. 6,000 feet, aren't they, Jay? In Las Vegas, New Mexico, 6,000 feet. She opened one because of the sunlight. Mm-hmm. Now, it didn't look pretty. It was pretty ugly, but it was on pretty poor dirt.
Yeah.
But, and I'll tell you another thing, without that corn crop, you can forget the cotton deal working in this country.
It's
That's
the
my
basics.
opinion.
No, you're right. This is
That's the key to the whole thing is the corn.
This is the pushback is, okay, well, cotton's so efficient, grow cotton on cotton. It's like, we know what that looks like.
We do.
You can't do that. But the benefit here is you can grow, if you've got just enough water, you can grow potentially full yield corn and then come back and grow a really nice cotton crop. And they just do this for you year after year.
And of course, if you don't have the water, cotton and sorghum.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the beauty of it is it's the grain. A grain crop versus a fruiting crop. Grass crop, broadleaf. Fibrous fruit, taproot. Long on water, tight on water. Just all of these things, they line up as perfect complements. The thing that I do like that makes it really useful is you're planting with the same equipment, you're using the same spray rigs, the commensurate buildup. You don't have to have an almond shaker to come out here to do this. You don't have to be geared up with all of these other tools. You can use essentially the same tools, save for when it comes to harvest time. That relationship is crucial. What else we got, Jourdan?
I think we touched on just about anything unless there's discussions.
I think we've covered all the ground we were prepared to, but we're
Yeah.
open. We'll be here as long as y'all want to visit.
I am glad that you mentioned silage, though. I mean, I think we can all know, the contracts out there, the amount of acres going to silage, discussion about the dairies moving northeast, what that is going to present with regards to water use, but also with regards to silage contracts, are really key. So that's a very important thing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we've known and look at, and it's not going away.
Mm-hmm.
Just like all these systems, they've got some legs to them. So it's worth our investment to figure out how to do it, because they're going to be part of our production system. So our goal is to do the best that we can with those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And regionally, there is a forage deficit, going into eastern New Mexico. So those contracts are definitely there, and it's amazing how far they are hauling forage, whether it's a winter small grain or a summer silage.
That's great. Tom, I got a comment based on you saying, you take that cotton straight that way. Quietly, one of my thoughts has been understanding how the heat unit models have been developed for cotton. Many of them were developed in very humid areas. They were developed in Mississippi. The other ones are developed in Arizona, which is an arid strategy. The one that we used here in this region is based on the Mississippi models. My thoughts, however, have been, I wonder how much of an answer this is for Kansas and Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
If we can figure out a different measure to truly categorize this, have we been playing the wrong game for so long? Does an understanding of what this crop really triggers off of, does that allow us to move this even farther north? Those are the type of things that I think we can tease out, but we've never had anybody been able to look at before. One of the things about this center that's useful is we've gotten that extra measure of control that really allows us to look at this that we just haven't had in the North Plains before.
Plant behaves differently here than it does in the South Plains.
Most
It
definitely.
does.
So the research is very important here. Of course, they don't have the elevation in Kansas where they're going to wheat here, but I agree. They're
Mhm.
useful up there, I think, more than what that here.
Yeah, and that's a big point, or a very good point. Our trial that we've had north of Groover, will always make more heat units than our trial at Muleshoe, and it's just that elevation, because Muleshoe is surprisingly higher than north of Groover.
Now, intuitively, would you have thought that?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
So data matters. I mean, that's the nature.
Yeah.
That's why we got to go through the experiment. Is sometimes our intuition is sidetracked a little bit by what we're otherwise exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So these are useful efforts. What's our yield here? Yeah. This field yielded 5 a couple years ago. Following a corn crop.
One thing I want to share with y'all, I don't know what to do about it. It's a grand field, and you'll kill maybe 2/3 of the weeds. This is like you're starting over again. So I don't know what's coming through the chemical stuff. I know FiberMax is working on a line that you can use balance flex or
Right.
I
Yeah,
forgot.
so in the HPPD cotton, like you said, like something you could go through, and especially on your corn acres, if you could put down balance flex across cotton acres too and come in. But we do know, like with balance flex, that's not giving you full season control, so you've got to have that post, but still gives you another option. I don't know if anyone here is seeing any issues with HPPD resistance. I have heard from people that they are concerned about HPPD resistance, especially in sorghum. Of course, Husky is has an HPPD chemical in it, and that's something that we've relied very heavily on in sorghum. Balance Flex, those type herbicides. So I do think it's going to give us options, but I hope we have to rely on other chemistries, I think, on top of that as well. I don't know if y'all are aware of the current issues with atrazine. EPA is talking about pulling atrazine, and there is a comment period for that. So it is important that everyone comments on that, and there's information online on where to comment on that. If anyone wants that, they can get a hold of me. And of course, not that atrazine's going to solve our problems. We all know there's issues with atrazine, but it definitely does enhance the activity of many herbicides. Yeah.
I keep thinking it's 5 in the morning again.
Oh, you guys go to the doctor pretty often.
Hey Stan, what was the herbicide program out here? And I will say, like I mentioned before, we had trouble on the peripheries with kochia running away. It was tough, really tough, but it wasn't for lack of effort.
We're just getting herbicides activated in a drought.
That too, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so we came behind the planter with burn everything down, and then it was Ingenia and Liberty and and then the hoe hands came through, and then my guys are out here hoeing. If you ever drove by on that west south side, over there was just 24 rows of solid kochia, and I contribute part of that. We planted about 40 feet around the edge with ryegrass, hoping to kind of suppress some of that dirt blowing and the weeds. But I don't know if maybe the ryegrass had kochia seed in it or something, because it was like a carpet. It's either that or the ryegrass took up the moisture and the weeds were just really tough. But they just laughed at us when we sprayed it. I ran the cultivator through the outside 24 rows to kind of help, and then the hoe hands. Yeah. We talked about that.
Stan and I were over there earlier this week and talked about the nutrient management program on feed kochia. Cattle seem to eat it. I don't know if they grow on it, but well, we can grow it.
It can be high in protein. It can also be hot too.
Yeah.
Nitrogen, so you gotta. No, young kochia is actually very. Man's alfalfa.
Just gotta stay young very long.
You get one day.
Every day, then in my room.
That's true.
Stand out. What rate did you use on Lake Creek and Rock?
No, I think it was like 30 pounds, something like that.
Would a higher rate help that you just didn't have moisture so long.
Yeah, the moisture to get it.
Get it going.
Yeah. Makes it really hard. But yeah, a thicker seeding rate for sure. But yeah, if you had a timely rain to get it established, that was definitely the challenge.
Jourdan, Nick, thank you very much for kind of going through this with us. I sure do appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy with what we're doing.
They'll be around a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And I wonder on the grasses also, ryegrass is a cool season grass, so it is going to have a higher water demand than a warm season. Of course, they're like a western wheatgrass it's also a cool season, but it's a little more drought tolerant. So maybe even it's hard to get grasses established in a drought for sure, but I don't know. species difference.
And one of the things we didn't touch on, and I'll keep talking as long as y'all are standing here. You can pull my string and I can rattle. We've got Grow Guru probes that have been in each of the pivots and in the south drip block for 4 consecutive seasons. We've also got probes that are in the north drip block. Those have 1 less season on them. All of these plots going this way on Jourdan's effort have AquaSpy probes in them. We've got on the corn over there, we've got 4 different varieties. In addition to the field varieties, we've got 5 AquaSpy probes in there. These are ways that we are able to monitor it and continue to look at it. Those are tools that I know they're useful. I know they're not brand new, but they work. They're a good part of the system. Another technology we're using regularly is Cirrus imaging, where we get the fixed wing flights. We started here towards the end of the season, flights every 2 weeks. They're pretty telling. They reveal us some interesting insights. I don't know that the bang for the buck is there for Cirrus on the intensity that we're using it, but I think if you were to look at some early season and maybe near pollination, you can definitely get some great value out of that information, where you can get the information in real time and make adjustments that will impact the way you manage the crop at crucial periods. We're trying to get it so we can categorize as we go. One of the benefits, of course, to anything that you're taking an image from above is like this. It highlights where your sprinkler's messed up. Like right now, it says, oh, I've got bad nozzles, I got plugged nozzles, I've got some discrepancy in my package. You can fix that right away. So that's probably the biggest point source value of Cirrus imaging. I think my favorite thing about a lot of these technologies is the way that they fit into a management program. It's a little different than most. You pay the bill, you get the data. You're not messing around with all of the steps of installs and maintenance and keeping after it. You just have something that's going to deliver you data at a timely moment where you can use that in making the decisions, really even for that day. This probe data for me has been crucial because I live 700 miles from here. So being able to get on my computer and go through it, and after an hour of digging through it, if I've missed it for a while, get on the phone with Stan, and we can have really meaningful discussions about, hey, what's this next step going to look like? We had one of the discussions earlier this week, talking about that last irrigation on that sprinkler, and decided to pull the trigger and irrigate it again, just by having some data, some reference for it. I'll make a point too with Grow Guru that I think we had potentially the first and the more continuous probes in the area here. Having 4 years, that's allowed us to have 2 full rotations of observation of this corn and cotton. And the benefit of being able to track that you got 0 precipitation in the winter, although that's hard news, it lets you know the reality of where you're tipping into that crop next. It's been able to get us to fine-tune that pre-water, which has become necessary as we've pushed planting dates way back and as capacity has gone way down. It helps us know that really on our cotton following the corn, our pre-water we can match just by providing the water that incorporates the pre-plant herbicide. When it's come to corn following cotton, where this cotton literally is going to extract over 10 inches of water from the soil as this season ends, we need to know when we start gaining that back. And as we track that with probes all throughout the winter, we see, oh great, we got 1 inch back there, we got 1/2 inch back there, and slowly but surely in a quote-unquote normal winter, we're closing that gap. And there's been years we haven't had to pre-water, but given 2 consecutive dry winters, this year we had to be pretty aggressive with pre-watering our corn. In addition to making laps to do our pre-plant, we ended up with 4.5 inches of pre-water on our corn. I would say that the context for that is that in the process of doing that, we were able to shut off a little bit early. We reached a critical management point at a normal point in early July, and the total aggregate amount of water that's applied is almost spot on with average. Our average has been 21.5. Our water applied this year is going to be just over 22. So I think the thought of pre-water and managing the winter is just crucial. We can do early and often and blow the budget on water, or we can do timely and strategically and hit all of those boxes along the way and stay within what our strategy is for water. I think that's a crucial way to look at some of these events. We're watering late, we watered early, but we were able to pull some water in the middle that's allowed us to do that on both ends. We might talk also about our early management in this field. One of the strategies we had done before was wait and water up. We decided this year, since we needed to get a little ahead of it, we wanted to have our soil temperatures up. And so we didn't aggressively water up. We had a little bit of water up high in the profile before we planted. I think that helped with the uniformity of this germination. It didn't get us more seeds to germinate, but this crop has been the most uniform cotton crop we've had.
One thing we did do a little different this year, we did switch in our nozzle tank. For the cotton, we'd get it down to 3 gallons per acre. But we left it at 4 this year. And I think that I think it was a little easier to manage. We could put that water on, make faster passes and shut off if we needed to. But the 3 gallon kind of, during the hot times of the summer, you just pretty much had to leave it running all summer long. But we were able to make a few laps and then shut off, and I think the irrigation really helped. Just if you had more water.
We talked about our social experiment going on this year. We drilled a new well. So now Stan's got all the water he can want. These are 2 different strategies that we've been talking about for a long time. If you're limited by capacity, you're handcuffed in your management. You get just a touch more capacity and plant within that to where now you can use some strategy for management. If you're disciplined, you can get some huge benefits from that. The question is, hey, are you disciplined? I got 4 GPM per acre out there. It's like, I'm gonna run it. It's like, no, you're not.
More is better.
More is better.
Yeah, more is.
And I think that's what we did find early in the season. It's like, Stan, I know that 4 GPM per acre feels pretty awesome, but hey, we're on pace to irrigate this like a corn crop if we're not careful. And that's where that discipline comes in. You just have to shape when is the best use of my water, when am I going to get the best bang for the buck on that unit. And I know that's not always the opportunity as capacity is declining, so there's different strategies there, but Stan's right. Having a little bit of capacity here makes a difference. And I might be a little bit defensive on why a well was drilled. A 60-year-old well has been giving us a lot of problems, and so it's not reliable. In order to maintain these, one of the crucial things we have to have is we must have the reliability of being able to keep these projects going. And so we have the same capacities we basically always have, but we've got a spare well essentially.